The economic situation in Ukraine requires a rapid response, and CEPR has provided that. Its new ebook, A Blueprint for the Reconstruction of Ukraine, sets out solutions for the post-war economic challenges the country will face. Well, can the international community work together to rebuild a shattered economy and shattered lives? I asked three of the report's authors. Hello, Yuri.
Hi.
And Barry as well.
Good to see you, Tim.
And Ken, welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
Now, Ken, if I could start with you on this. Is it premature to start thinking about reconstruction when we don't even know the full extent of the damage to Ukraine's economy and, well, we don't even know who's going to prevail in the conflict?
Well, in wars like this, unfortunately, you always have to start thinking about what comes at the other end because otherwise it arrives and you're not ready for it. Obviously, we hope for the best, but we do know what the destruction has been already. Our report contains an estimate of that, and I think it's broadly similar to others of at least 500 billion euro all in, counting repatriating migrants and such, and only rising by the day. If you look at other big wars, that's always something people think about. In World War II, they started thinking about, what kind of system for the international financial system we'd have after the war was over already in 1942. So I think it's important. And also as academics, I think we felt where we had the most to contribute was maybe over the longer term of how to think about reconstruction.
Yes, Barry, is there a precedent for a reconstruction program on this scale for this type of country?
Ken already alluded to World War II and post-World War II experience. I continue to think that is the most relevant parallel. Ukraine is a fairly heavily industrialized economy. Western Europe after World War II was heavily industrialized. Ukraine is export-oriented and linked into Europe. The European economies before and after World War II were interconnected as well. So I think that is very much a relevant parallel, but history rhymes, as they say. There are also differences that this is not going to be a U.S.-led effort. This is going to be a multilateral effort, for example.
Yuri, Ken did mention a figure for the scale of the damage so far. How much do we know about the damage to Ukraine's economy so far? And what assumptions can we make based on that for the type of reconstruction program it's gonna take?
Well, with the fog of war, it's hard to say anything precise at this point, but we can rely on indirect measurements, for example, consumption of electricity. And if you look at these metrics and put everything together, we're looking at something 30 to 50% decline in GDP this year. We're hoping that it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, and obviously we have to make assumptions to make this kind of predictions. Some of the key assumptions are that Ukraine is going to have security guarantees that another invasion by Russia is not going to happen anytime soon, that refugees are going to return to their original residences wherever it's possible, and most importantly, Ukraine is promised membership in the EU.
Yuri, also, I note from the report that you propose that Ukraine must own its reconstruction program, which is interesting. Is it going to have the ability, the institutional capacity to be able to do this?
This is a great question, and I would say three things. First, Ukraine is full of surprises. When Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody gave Ukraine 48 hours, 72 hours. It is now 71st day of their resistance, and so we have some hope here that Ukraine can stand up to the challenges. Second, historians say that Europe is forced in crisis. This is a crisis on a huge scale. I think country is going to look very, very different going forward. And finally, being offered membership in the EU is a very powerful motivator. And also, Ukraine will rely on institutional capacity of the European Union in this trajectory. And so the European Union is going to give a very good anchor for many processes such as regulation, competition, procurement. Um, I am optimistic that Ukraine is going to succeed on this trajectory.
So let's have a look at what you propose in this document. It is very detailed what you do propose. Ken, first of all, what needs to happen immediately whilst the conflict is still going on?
Well, I mean, I want to emphasize that winning the conflict, getting as good an outcome as possible, having as few people get killed as possible, that is obviously the most important thing. It's this changes by the day. We're not really focused on that. We're more about what happens afterwards. I want to underscore something Yuri just said that's really, I think, a centerpiece of our analysis, is that before the conflict, certainly before 2014, Ukraine was in many ways, corrupt like Russia, had many of the same problems. Already the invasion in Crimea had led to many changes. But I think this conflict's really a defining moment in what people want to be, where Ukraine wants to be. And certainly the fact that Europe is marshaling so much behind this, even if Ukraine is not promised EU membership immediately, simply thinking of that, I think it's pretty reasonable as a long-term anchor, is going to have profound changes. It's not going to turn Ukraine into Sweden overnight, but I think it'll be very, very important. And then just come back to the point we started with, Tim. We tried to think of, what as academics can we really frame now in this rapidly changing situation, and the reconstruction's going to be there, and you need to think about it. We maybe come to it later, but there's an order in which you do things, and you have to think about the financing. I mean, suppose it's 500 billion euro to start with. That's not a check you just go to somebody and say, hey, we need $500 billion. You have to get them prepared for that. I was very heartened to see that the European Commission has just announced exactly that they're going to have work done right away on thinking about how to pay for reconstruction in the Ukraine. And let me lastly say, I at least giving my own view, and I think to some extent shared by many of the people in the report, Europe bears special responsibility for this, and I think bears special responsibility for the cost. So I hope Europe's not thinking of 3 billion euro, which is just not going to do the job. If this is going to be very costly, and think of it as Europe's defense, bolstering up Ukraine, which has done such really phenomenal things for reinvigorating NATO, helps Europe.
Yes, let's talk about all of those things. First of all, Barry, when we look further ahead to this reconstruction, how do you set up a program and manage to keep to that timetable? And how far into the future is it practical to plan?
I think we have to start by recognizing that this is going to be a multi-year effort, that you can repair railways and bridges quickly, but you can only rebuild the housing stock over a period of years. Rebuilding the housing stock is going to be critical for reversing the brain drain that has begun. How do you plan a multi-year program? The answer is flexibly, because things are going to be changing. I think there are innovations that can be capitalized upon, like modular housing, but urban planning is a lengthy process, and I think we have to be in this for the long haul, and especially the Western donors have to avoid fatigue.
Yes, and Ken, if we are going to be in it for the long haul, it's going to take a lot of money. So does that mean Ukraine's going to be saddled with debt for a generation?
Well, I think lessons from past experiences really suggest the donors have to understand this needs to be outright grants mainly and not loans. There needs to be conditionality in how it's doled out. That's very important. Ukraine needs to own the program. They need to think about what that conditionality is. It can't be imposed from the outside. The people inside Ukraine care about the money being spent well just as much as the donors do. But I think it's absolutely critical that it not be loans. And I might add, I mean, this is one of a few reasons that it really makes a European-centric entity make the most sense and not a multilateral aid agency like the IMF. Well, it's not really an aid agency. It makes loans. It makes very short-term loans. And if you pile money into a country that obviously won't be able to pay it in a few years, it's just a recipe for catastrophe. And lastly, the IMF has governance from the whole world, including Russia, China, countries that are not necessarily invested in having Ukraine do well. And so I think it needs to come from Europe. They spent a similar amount on Next Generation Europe. They've made very big payments to Poland. And again, this isn't just about helping the Ukraine. If you don't help the Ukraine, the tanks are going to be in your backyard tomorrow.
Yes, let's talk about Europe, Barry. In the report, you advocate fast-tracking Ukraine into the EU. Might that be resisted by countries who presumably will be struggling to repair the economic damage their own economies, and would have to share the burden of reconstructing Ukraine?
I think the real constraint here is not so much that Western European countries will have their own problems, but rather that there's a whole slew of Southeastern European countries queued up for membership as well. So the issue is fast-tracking a substantial group of countries, and not only Ukraine. I'm not arguing against, and I was heartened to hear Austrian officials the other day say that the EU needs to rethink its admission procedures so as to accelerate the process. But I think we have to acknowledge that it will not only be Ukraine, but it will be a group of countries that will have to be treated comparably.
Yes, Ken, you mentioned earlier the idea that we build back Ukraine differently. You're not suggesting that the reconstruction is to create Ukraine as it was, but to create a different type of Ukrainian economy?
Absolutely. There are all kinds of elements to this. I think being green will be appealing to the European donors. But look, let's face it, the number one factor is institutions, and modernizing the institutions, having the pull of eventual EU membership, even if it's not concrete and not right away, I think will have a big effect. Let's be clear-eyed if we look at Hungary and Bulgaria and some of these other countries that, incorporated in Barry's comments. They also don't look like Sweden yet, but it's a big improvement over where they were, and I think pushes Ukraine in the right direction. And again, the war, I think, will just change the mentality. Certainly the Ukrainians I've spoken to, it's really amazing how much it's changed how everyone is thinking about things.
But finally, Yuri, what everyone who's watching this is thinking is, how big is the bill going to be? Do you have a number for us?
This is really a moving target. As of March this year, when we wrote the report, we estimated the cost of reconstruction to be anywhere between 200 billion euros and 500 billion euros. It's not a one-time payment. It's the sum that is going to be spread over multiple years. And this magnitude is comparable to the cost of reconstruction for countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, the Marshall Plan after World War II. But we should also understand that every day of the war is making this cost higher and higher and higher. And if this war goes on with its intensity and destruction at the current pace for a few more months or maybe a few more years, we're looking at trillion, maybe more.
Well, these are big decisions, and let's hope the international community is brave enough to take them. But thank you for your rapid response on this, and thank you for talking to me about it today, all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
The report is called A Blueprint for the Reconstruction of Ukraine. It is the first in CEPR's Rapid Response Economics series. The authors are Torbjorn Becker, Barry Eichengreen, Yuri Gorodnichenko, Sergei Goriev, Simon Johnson, Timothy Milovanov, Kenneth Rogoff, and Beatrice Veda Di Mauro. It's a free download. You can get hold of it using the link that's on screen now. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.